So good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something we do every Monday afternoon. Even today, though it is Columbus Day and also Indigenous Peoples Day in the US. So profiles of everybody in this group is on mondaylive.org. The views expressed are personal and not of any company or organization. Please do make this interactive with the Q&A and comments on Zoom, and complete the survey at the end if you could. And this slide deck will be on mondaylive.org once we finish. So today's agenda, chit chat about what's going on. As you may have heard, we've already started that. The main sort of discussion is really about open. This is obviously an important topic for this industry and how it's changing, and Alpa's going to lead on that conversation. Before that, a few slides that some of us have shared or put together. Ken is talking about November theme of automated buildings. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. Having spent years trying to avoid airplane food, now it seems that some people actually go to airplanes to do nothing but to eat, certainly in Singapore, so that's kind of a little bizarre. That's a classic case of repurposing a building or a plane. There you go. Mark talking about the Hilton sort of project that I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, and Jim talking about the opportunities in businesses during pandemic. And those are all the slides. So let us start. Who wants to start? Ken, you want to talk about briefly what you're doing in March?
Sure. Okay. Well, I was kind of pushing on this theme of navigating the never, what we've never done before. I think it's basically what we are all kind of bumping into. I did an interview with the fellow Eric and Ken at Control Trends, and we chat a bit about that. That link is there as well. The article that Contractor Magazine put up is there. I talk also about me being Mr. Linkler, as I started way back when, and the main purpose of automated buildings was to link together all the .coms, and all the .coms are kind of well known now. And the other trend that has gone on is pretty much everybody's in the self-publication business, and as it turns out, they do a better job of it than I do. But the problem is now we have such a myriad of blogs and corporate information that is extremely valuable, but it's spread across our industry. So my new mission is to do what I did for the .coms, to take the social media of today, whatever format it might be in, and provide you links to it, because that's really all automated buildings ever does, is just links you to stuff. And I think what we'll do is we'll start abbreviating rather than doing a lot of full articles. We'll start just go to the link, highlight what I think is important. I might make a few comments about how it fits into the big picture, curating it as I usually do. And that'll give us a sort of a fresh format to kind of move ahead. So I'd like you all to, where if you can't find time to write, still happy to publish your articles if you can find time. If you can't find time to do that, and you've got a link that's you want to share with the industry, if you send it on to me, then we can do that. We can credit you as the source of the link, and we'll just kind of see how that all works. It's just transformational progress.
Wonderful innovation. Mark, do you want to tell us about what you found on Hilton?
Yeah, again, it's kind of interesting where everybody, as a result of this whole COVID thing, is being resilient and trying to find new things. And to echo Ken, never is never, is not never. They are undergoing a business model to rent fully office type hotel rooms for the day, for the hour, for those who want to get away from either their own home offices or you're traveling. And what's interesting is not only you get the connections and you get a desk, you get a big screen, you can hook up your computer and all that. You also get access to the meals and beverages and things like that. So again, instead of renting it for a room for 24 hours, 48 or whatever like we all have, it's short stays for those who want an office. Again, existing structure, and all they're doing is repurposing it. So, and I think, we're starting to see a lot of this repurposing as a result of COVID. So interesting approach by Hilton.
Mhm.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, they're just set up to do that. You can get catering services. There are bigger rooms. And I'm not just talking about Hilton. That could be virtually any business hotel that's out there could be doing something like this.
And I'm sure they are, to your point, Tracy. I mean, Hilton is just the one example that I found and highlighted today, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how much of an experiment that is and how successful they are, and be worth monitoring. Jim, you're talking about new businesses, people racing to create new businesses.
Yeah, I think that perhaps this was a little bit of a surprise. But the statistics came out of I think the Federal Reserve, showing very significant increase in new business formation in the United States. And the question is, why now? And what will this do for employment in the long term? I think that people are speculating that, now that we're kind of used to working at home, that some people are thinking, well, I could start a home-based business, at least start it at home and see where it goes from there. But will these people starting these new businesses be hiring, or will it just be sort of in the family? I think that we don't know yet. But in any case, I think it's seen as a positive trend.
One of the things that we've noticed in our business is what I've termed pandemic accelerated opportunities. And they're not pandemic created, so I want to differentiate just a little bit. So these were products or services or technology that was in existence prior to the pandemic, but have been refocused or reprioritized to come to market now. And it's really created quite a pipeline for us and some new revenue, some new business for us. And I thought we were just maybe in a little bit of a unique position in this year and with everything that's been going on to be so fortunate to have this extra business coming in and so forth. But over the weekend, I happened to reach out to some of my old college roommates who also have businesses and or work for others. And it turns out there are little niches of the same thing going on all over the place. So one example was the pulp and paper industry, where one of my roommates works at a very large pulp and paper company, and their paper industry is up because of deliveries and new packaging and wrapping and everything that was needed. And their lumber industry is now taken over as the #1 most profitable sub-business because the price of lumber has increased so much with everybody adding to their homes or doing remodels or whatever is driving it. I'm not entirely sure. And then civil engineering was the other one. One of my former roommates is a civil engineer, works for a company, and they have more business than they know what to do with. All kinds of new civil engineering projects. They do mostly wastewater and public kinds of projects. So I'm not entirely sure what's driving that, but it seems that there's a lot of this going on, and it might be consistent with some of this new employment that Jim was seeing. or a new
Seems
business.
like there's a lot of VC funds starting up as well, getting a lot of investment to actually start off globally. There's seems to be, people are hungry to actually get new funds together to invest in new companies, which would tie back into what you guys are saying, that they'll be looking at technologies and other things that are beginning to spin out with the whole situation.
Yeah.
Anto counts on me from the report from Silicon Valley, and I had an interesting conversation on this note last week. So some of my contacts that are in engineering firms like that have done some of the most progressive net zero energy type big projects. There's been, because as Roger pointed out earlier, the next generation of projects, new projects, are curtailing. There's layoffs there, massive layoffs inside the engineering firm for designers of brand new projects. And the smartest people, Google is picking them up. He's like, Google is hiring all these building people if they know what they're doing and they've lost their jobs. Here at this firm, Google's hiring them. So Amazon, Facebook probably aren't far behind for picking up building knowledge that way. So there is my report from Silicon Valley.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything new to interject?
This isn't controls directly related, but from an economic recovery standpoint, I thought it was very interesting that the WHO came out over the weekend and said that lockdowns need to be discontinued. They create more economic destruction than they do help with the virus, and that's a major reversal. It hasn't been reflected in any government policy so far, but for the WHO to say that, which is a worldwide organization, is a major shift. So I think we should be keeping track of how that may or may not influence particular governments in terms of their lockdown strategy. Because you look at Europe, they've been accelerating or re-emphasizing their lockdowns, thinking that that's the right policy decision. And the WHO is saying, no, that's actually a bad policy decision economically, particularly for the poorer nations out there. It's absolutely the wrong thing to do. So
I think that the thing in Europe, Steve, is that they're desperately concerned about overloading the hospitals.
Yeah, I just don't know whether that's real or not, Roger.
Yeah, there's hospitals getting full up again now.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Did that go into details as to what kind of lockdown that they're advising against? Is it countrywide lockdown or region, or did you?
It was generic from what I read, Anto. It was generic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more the countries are not doing total lockdown this time around. They're doing it regionally.
Right. Interesting.
That is interesting. It's in such contrast to the health in general, the health community.
Yeah.
And what they recommend.
Well, New York City is looking at that regionally or selected lockdown possibilities depending on, Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and then within those areas, just specific, let's say, blocks or areas. So I don't think they've gone through with it yet, but Governor Cuomo has been talking about it.
Yeah.
All right, let us move on to talking about open, since that is our subject of the week. So I'm going to hand it over to Alper. I think you want to share a couple of slides, Alper, just to kick us off.
Yeah.
Over to you.
So everyone can see the screen?
Yep.
Good. All right, so open is already here, and it's definitely changing in hyper speed. And I broke it down into 4 little topics. And there's open software, there's open hardware. We will talk about the benefits to the IoT and the future of open as far as hardware and software goes. In our industry, the open devices are already here. There's BeagleBone. It is being used at least by 5 different controls manufacturers that I know of, or they use the design specification for the open hardware. As we know, open software is already here. We are utilizing it highly. On the open software, basically scaling commercial software by making it easier has been the main area that open software has been used. And we see that with Project Haystack, with SkySpark and other tools. And it was tried before within our industry with Sedona Framework and Niagara. At least it was the idea before that company got bought up. It simplifies the market penetration by adoption. People feel safer with open software because they know that it's not going to go anywhere. If the commercial company decides to take it out of the market, they are not left with anything. They still have the open source code that they can maintain. Everyone knows that I'm working on Project Sandstar, merging Sedona with Haystack. It enables other things like hardware agnostic controls. On the hardware side, it enables us to have supply chain improvements because you have the hardware designs. So if you're manufacturing it with company A and that company is having supply chain issues, you can move it to another state or another location easily. If you're buying a hardware that is not open, you wouldn't even be able to do that at all. The second part is that you can mash up devices and you can create variety of devices, which enables our industry to go to the level of true IoT. And I will show that on the next slide, what kind of devices coming out. Faster improvements on cycles, since we are not basically stuck with proprietary devices, you can engineer these faster and it lowers cost a lot. Benefits to the IoT. Basically, if you look at IoT, you need hardware and you need the software at the same time. They go hand in hand. And it basically lowers us to build these devices without any licensing restrictions. And also, it enables us to move different verticals. We are in the building automation vertical. You can actually move these devices to agriculture, air quality, and so on and so forth. The future, I think the future is really great for open. We all know that most of the IoT devices today is pretty much utilizes ARM processors, and ARM just got bought by NVIDIA. That might increase the prices in the future. So there's an open source instruction set. It's actually being used by pretty much the whole semiconductor industry. It's called RISC-V. I put the website on there. You can watch developments on this side of things. And as far as devices, the variety of devices, the top left corner is BeagleBone Green. You got on the top right, it's an ESP32 chip. Bottom left is a Raspberry Pi. The middle bottom is from OpenCV, and it is basically a camera to look for, it has AI built in so that you can do a lot of different things with vision. And the bottom right is banana. So pretty much the hardware industry is going through all the fruits that is available for us. So that being said, I will start the conversation with everyone else overall.
So I've got a question, Alper, for you on the hardware specifically, which is, can I, if I'm Johnson, say, and I put my software in one of these open hardware devices, can Honeywell come along and put their software in that same device?
If they allow it,
is it really open from the standpoint, like we think of a server, you can put anybody's software on any server platform. Are we talking about at the embedded level being able to swap out the software that goes into an embedded device?
If they allow it, yes.
Who allows? I mean, okay.
The initial company that installed created the hardware, installed the software. If they allow SSH access to that device, then yes. then it will be a truly open, yeah.
Yeah, the hardware that's shown there, does it include the I/O?
The I/O is usually, these devices have pins on them, and you make either hats or capes onto these devices, which you utilize the I/O from.
Okay, so they're essentially very sophisticated motherboards minus the I/O.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So one comment that I've heard talking about open source, not with any specific product or project in mind, is that in the building space where you are installing something that is expected to work for 10, 20 years, that the notion of having a piece of software that you can't point somebody to when something goes wrong seems to be a concern. That I've heard that may be there may be a resistance because of that. It's nice to say other people can do stuff on it, but this kind of the downside of it is that nobody's really responsible for that piece of software.
Let me address that a little bit, because we've lived that as a kind of a middle player in my company. But I would define this a little as a donut hole, right? And there's this part of it is true up front, and it's proprietary, and you can't avoid that. And there's this hole in the middle where things are evolving and de facto standards are being formed, and more hardware is being deployed, so it's becoming, a little bit more widely used and supported. But it does eventually reach a point, just like in the IT world, where it is so standardized and so widely deployed that arguably you have more resources to support it and more people who understand what's going on, and you can create competitive bids and so forth for maintenance contracts and updates and so forth. So we kind of see it, go through that evolution a little bit over time. I'm not sure that there's anything truly, though, in our, maybe Niagara and Jace kind of architectures might be the closest thing really to being so widely deployed that there are so many choices to support it. But it's still not, I think a lot would say, on one hand, it's very open, and on the other hand, it's not very open. And open, by the way, is not just about the hardware and the software, but it has to take into account the licensing, the market availability, territorial restrictions, all kinds of things like that too.
And I'll jump in. I kind of echo Tracy a little bit towards the tail end of what you said. I think as our industry, we all have been in this industry for some time now, and we've heard the term, the word, the phrase open. I think now it is shared by the word open, I should say, is shared by many. However, like anything else, I found that open within our industry means different things to different people. Despite as we have come and continue to try to come up with a common and agreed upon definition, we can't, or we haven't, I should say, in my opinion yet. Today, all companies that I'm aware of will say that their systems are open, but and truly, are they truly open? And let me kind of bring it down to this, is that for me, is open requires 3 minimum criteria at the very outset. One, is it accessible, supported, and complete, and competes within the free market? Very similar, I think, Tracy, to what you and Alper were saying there, a little bit different way. Is both the product, the end product, and the platform designed to communicate with other systems via open protocols and standards? And then once deployed, can it be supported and maintained by a free market? And then I'll just throw this at, we look at open. Is there a difference between open platform, open source, open standard, open system, open hardware? What's the difference? Is there a difference? I don't know, or, So, and then finally, I kind of look at this is that, is there a difference when we are entertaining conversations around open between the technology side of open and the business side of open? So I don't have the answers. These were just things when we decided that we were going to talk about open. I just wrote some notes down or whatever, and I don't have those answers. So
I think open is the most abused word in our industry.
So I kind of want to make a point about that, about the word open itself. I've strolled around many trade shows and look at sort of marketing and other things, and quite often I see open, we are open, and I walk by them and I always think that's the same as me walking down the high street and seeing an open barbershop, right? It means nothing other than I can do business with them, right? So there was an interesting thread on LinkedIn a few weeks back, and somebody, I can't remember who it was, and I couldn't search it enough, that said basically the word open shouldn't be used unless you qualify what you're talking about. So the word open is like a barbershop being open, but open systems is obviously open systems, open source, open standards, open specifications. Unless you qualify it, it's totally meaningless.
That's it really has been hijacked by so many people in so many different ways. And to Mark's point, there's so many nuances depending on whether you're talking about open source and hardware and that part of it, or open licensing, or open, I can buy it from multiple people, in my territory, the business model behind it. You really have to specifically talk about it. And then you got, protocols that were developed in open committee and public standards forums. And then when they hit the market, a lot of them, initially were implemented in proprietary ways, right? So I think if you go back to sort of the genesis of, the battle and when open first started becoming popular as a term in our industry, it really meant one is open and one is proprietary, right? And that's what I think a lot of people sort of built their view of what open means upon. And now it means so many different things. It really has evolved completely differently, and it is an overused word, and I agree, almost meaningless unless you put definition to what you're meaning when you say that.
I think, Tracy, with our own industry, there are though some things that kind of have moved into the open word kind of by osmosis. You can say, okay, there's open protocols, which really means open communications or device connectivity, which kind of has happened. Systems can talk to each other now, regardless of whether it's one protocol or another. I mean, there's enterprise-wise, people are using APIs to share information and gain access and database compatibility. I think the next bit is kind of the open platform, which is just saying a platform where you can develop applications on products. And certainly if you're buying a control solution, you can't do that with most products out there at the moment. Okay, you could with Niagara and a few other things, J2, but it's kind of, being able to actually put your own applications and products on, and also building a global community that can access that information and the marketplace, but still making it all kind of hardware agnostic. And the final bit for me is the method that you touched on there, which is open distribution, which means it's available through multiple sources. There's no lock-in. And it's kind of summarizing that, it's kind of saying it's the ability to choose the best of breed products and service providers, but also preserve your existing investments, take advantage of new technology and products without abandoning perhaps what you already have, and offer that more competitive bidding, so you get those life cycle costs and not locked in.
Yeah, we always used, if you look at it from an end user's definition, and this is kind of going back a bit, what does open mean to an end user? And, to me, it was the ability for them to buy on the open market, to not be restricted, to have, can't remember who it was, came up with the term sustainable competitive advantage from an end user standpoint, meaning that they could have multiple contractors bidding to do install work or maintenance after the fact and that kind of a thing. To me, as a distribution company, it was really easy for us in terms of what we felt was open and not open. And that is, could I buy it and could I sell it pretty much to anyone? If there are restrictions on licensing or territories or things like that, or it was not compatible with other manufacturers' products that were using the same protocol or the same platform, then to me, that was not an open kind of a product or platform or technology. So, you know, today it's really evolved tremendously, right? There was a time at Ingenuity where we really only sold Lawnworks products because they were extremely interoperable among manufacturers. Now we sell more BACnet product because BACnet's more widely deployed and it is much more interoperable than it used to be. So it's really evolved from that standpoint a whole lot since we first kind of started using that term, I don't know, a couple decades ago, it seems like almost.
And I think you're seeing more also at the top end where the supervisor is moving off site and, you know, being remotely, and therefore, you know, people are accessing, sharing information via APIs and opening up their databases that way. And it's looking then to sell the services that sit on top of it rather than the product.
So we've kind of touched on several, let's just call them characteristics of open. So another question, and Tracy, you kind of brought this up a little bit, is does open and interoperability go hand in hand? In other words, if you are open, is it a requirement that whatever has to be interoperable?
I would ask a slightly different question, which is the opposite to that. Just because something is not open, that doesn't mean that it's not interoperable. Right. So I'm not sure the two are related.
But then if we as an industry are trying to create the characteristics and create the reasons and the value benefits of why open, would you concur that interoperability is one of those value points or benefits?
Yes.
I would think so. I mean, going back to somebody was saying earlier, back where this all started, it was like open versus proprietary, because back in the 80s, all we had was proprietary in this industry, right? So maybe now it's more like open. The opposite to open is actually restricted. That there's some restriction either through technology or distribution or contract or some other mechanism for such products to be used.
So if you look at the hardware side of it, the interoperability is on the software and the protocol. But on the hardware side, we will achieve eventually what the PC industry has achieved. There's a standard called PCI port on computers, and you can buy an audio card, you can buy a graphics card, you can buy different cards, and eventually you will be able to buy your IOs, different IOs. It's actually here, but it's not highly utilized yet by our industry with these hats and capes.
But you think, Alpa, that's because people have still got to find a way of making money. Don't forget, most of us are here to actually try and earn some money at the business we're in, and until the industry finds a way and navigates through that to actually say, okay, how am I going to make money out of this offering?
That is correct.
Is the challenge.
That is correct. It is changing how the supply chain, how the money making, it completely shifts the whole system around.
And is the
I was going to say that open is not free. Like, if anybody thinks that open equals free, that is not true.
No.
And I'll just throw out like Three examples, weather data. Weather data is something a lot of our customers need. We thought weather data was free. It came from the government. There's now IBM bought the weather service. There's AccuWeather that wants to make money on selling weather data. Weather data was actually, somebody's got to create it. I guess it came from the government. I'm not going to go there, but it's just an example of, hey, I guess this really isn't free. Let's talk about Java. You know, that some throughout, oh, we'll open source it. Does that make it free? It really doesn't make it free because it has to be, over the many years that Java's been out there, it's got to be reviewed and tested. There's white hats, there's black hats that are trying to find vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities have to be patched. Somebody's got to do that work and someone's got to get paid for it. So and that's another case where open does not equal free, in that you keep finding, you know, ICS CERT is finding vulnerabilities in Google code. It's finding vulnerabilities in all these codes that, yeah, the code's been left into the wild, but it still has to be patched, and you have to make everybody aware. You know, there's work to be done and work has to be paid for. I had one, you know, a third example is, anyway, you get where I'm going with it.
Alper, you wanted to answer Jeff's question.
I think he asked about MEP, and OpenBIM would be the only thing that I could see that could integrate with us on the hardware and software side. And Oscar.
So, other people that not talked about open, Jim?
Yeah, I'd love to make a comment. The thing that interests me about open is a new cross-cutting issue, which actually touches on all of those elements of open, and that's actually security. It touches on hardware, it touches on software, it touches on protocols, it touches on business models.
Yeah.
And you know, as we bring security along, security is one of the great things that closes open. And you know, the question is as you introduce security into the situation, how do you strive to maintain interoperability? How do you strive to maintain open? And once again, how do you strive to maintain those business models when someone has got to pay to ensure that security? And who is it?
I think closed is less secure than open. And that we can go into the philosophy of it, but there are a lot of different discussions on that overall.
But I think that what my interest in is in how one structures technology to secure open, not to move towards closed.
You have more eyes looking. If you're looking at the code side, you have more eyes looking at the design or the code, right, and they send patches in. If you're a closed company, you need to hire all those programmers. So the more eyes looking at the software, I think it is better. On hardware side, you have the whole specification, and if you get manufactured, you can compare the chips that are even implemented in it. Even on the hardware side, I think openness would be more secure than closed.
But there's still the job of throwing it on the test bed. You know, so a vulnerability has been found by all those wonderful white hats, you know, tapping the code and finding the vulnerabilities. It still has to be corrected, patched, communicated. All of that is work that just doesn't happen magically. And even BACnet, I was coming back to the point about data interoperability, that's where I lost the thread, is there's still this idea, even if you want to be BACnet certified, BACnet came out of an open committee, but they still want money, right? They're in, you know, to put product on their test beds and give it their good housekeeping seal, it still costs money.
That's open specification. It's not open software. There are BACnet stacks out there that are open that cannot be utilized by commercial industry, but you can do it for your home projects maybe. But most of the BACnet stack, you either choose by commercial version, but or you build it yourself. You write it from the spec, reading the spec, you write it yourself. So open spec and open software are two different things.
And to get to interoperability, you need that test. Somebody's got to test it. And I guess that's how Red Hat made its money, or, you know, you take Open Linux and then you add these service components that are that, throwing it on the test bed, putting your seal on it, having a call center if somebody's having problems with it. But it's still a business, and it's still, you know, you don't get completely away from licensing fees and being charged. If it's a good product, there's going to be a cost to it.
I think a big portion of open is the community that supports it, and this community of practice, which is part of your invention there, Therese. But basically, the whole support of it is how open it is and how well it actually works in an open environment. And we have some great success stories in BACnet, and we have some great success stories in Haystack, and we now have other organizations, community of practices coming together. And I think what we're all finding too, as we move out into the IoT world, we're finding bigger communities. And if we trust these communities, then there's a greater chance for the open to work. So I think it's not just the technology, it's who are the people that support it, and how open are they, and are they willing to work? Do they do plug fests? Are they really committed to trying to make this stuff open? And you know, like some of the stuff that Alper has done he's certainly shown us that anything he's doing is not hidden, it's completely open, and he wants us to get involved, and he works with open organizations like Haystack to validate what he's doing. So I think that whole interaction of the community of practice is a big piece of it.
So
if I could, Anto, you brought up the point about interoperability versus open. And I think, personally, I think our industry is still completely proprietary, fundamentally, because the hardware is proprietary in nature. Alper, despite what you just said earlier, it's still proprietary hardware at the end of the day. By the time you add the I/O boards and you put the specific software in it, you can't swap out the software like you can on an iPhone or on an Android phone. So you really don't have interchangeability of the vendor who put the original system in, which by buying one hardware platform at the embedded level. And I would argue that I don't know that the industry could ever get there, because you look at all the IoT devices that are coming out, look at Ring Central, look at all their devices for the home. You can't swap out the application in that doorbell you just put on your house or on the camera you put in your house. It is what it is. It's going to be from that vendor and only from that vendor. And if you get tired of them, you got to rip it out and put a different vendor in, including the hardware. So I think the layer at which we can realistically be better or continue to get better is at the interoperability layer, where whether it's through protocols or better APIs or Haystack type standards, but I think trying to think that we're going to end up with two hardware platforms, one for Android and one for iOS, effectively, and Linux and Windows. It's not going to happen. We're just too hardware centric for that to occur. That's my 2 cents.
So David Katz asked a question about open protocols in the context of digital twins. I think that's a really interesting way to think about this, and I'm actually involved with the Digital Twin Consortium trying to figure some of this out. And it's interesting because it's like the problem that we're facing, except like multiplied by 100 or 1,000, right? Because the number of domains, the number of information domains, number of different protocols and standards and models and et cetera is just overwhelming when you're trying to sort of think about how a train station can work nicely with a McDonald's that happens to be on the side of it, next to it, right? Sort of very, very different sort of domains that need to somehow work together, because digital twin is all about bringing everything together. So I think it's a very interesting, the interoperability is probably the way to think about it, how you can actually connect things on a massive level without having to reinvent everything all the time.
Mark was going to say something, he couldn't say it.
Sure, Mark.
Well, I forgot what I was going to say, to be perfectly honest with you. But let me ask, kind of on Steve's point to the group. Does open drive the fact that the hardware, again, becomes just the enabler piece of this, and ultimately it's the applications, it's the software, it's all the other stuff. If you think about a PC, it's all that secret stuff that you might put on, I shouldn't say secret, it's how your Microsoft, your Excel, your Adobe, that is the stuff you're using a PC for. So in our industry, is that going to be, or is it the same way that it doesn't matter what the controller is, it's just an enabler that a building owner chooses, I want X brand, Y brand, or Z brand?
I agree.
So I'm going to, Trevor Dukes just asked to be brought in, so I'm going to bring him in because he has a point that he wants to make in response to what Steve said. Trevor, you're on.
But muted still.
But muted, yes.
Okay, can you hear me now? How's that?
That's a little soft, but so you need to shout. Go ahead.
Sorry. To Steve, just what you were saying, you know, the advantage is not in having a better actuator or opening a damper faster. You want to have the best smarts behind it. Just like all these analytics companies, if you have properly tagged data, then you can plug in extremely easily to Coppertree, to Resolute, to anybody. You want to eliminate as much of the lower level stuff as possible and have the device be agnostic. I think in the next few years, automobiles, you know, if you can subscribe to Tesla's autopilot for $100 a month or Ford's autopilot for $50 a month, I do think that the hardware is becoming less of the product, and the smarts behind it are. By having a common open hardware platform, you can elevate the software side to differentiate the software.
Yeah, and I'll pile onto that. Something similar to what I was thinking, Trevor, is ultimately what I hear about these days when I talk to customers is the data and access to the data, ability to have a two-way communication back into the platform. And that's what really matters. They don't care what the hardware is. It is there to who Steve or Mark or whoever made the point, you know, for the purpose of enablement to me. And this coming from, you know, I've been a Landmark member from the very beginning, 20 plus years, right? And so open protocols and all of the interoperability that, you know, I've lived that for decades. But now, to me, the great equalizer are web platforms and open APIs. That's where integration is happening in interoperability, not so much at the hardware and protocol. We don't care anymore if you as long as you can get it to and create a secure connectivity path to a web application. I don't care what protocols or hardware or anything else that you have there. We'll make it work.
I don't care if the device is pink or purple or what. That's not what you're looking at. And as you're talking about the next generation of web protocols, we don't even know what the next generation is beyond that. But I know that if I have something that there's a chance I can upgrade and I don't know that I'm going to have to rip it out, I'll be more confident buying that, knowing that it can be added to, and it's not just the cheapest locked in static development.
Yeah, which Trevor, what I'm suggesting is if the industry made, I don't know, 8-point, 16, 32-point controllers with generic IO configurations, and I can download my controller applications from 15 different vendors, it all runs on the same hardware, then we're fighting for the better applications, and you're just treating it like your phone. And if I don't like this guy's app, I download the next guy's app and it runs on my phone. So because to the point is, At the end of the day, I just want that data because all the smart decisions I'm going to make from an analytics standpoint are going to be done elsewhere. But I want to be able to deploy and grab the data and run my core control application and move on. So yeah, but we don't have that today. That's what I'm saying.
We are this close getting there, Steve.
But
We are this close.
Okay.
So does this
Steve,
continue something we touched on before, which contributes to perhaps the demise of the bigger controls companies? Because if hardware becomes hardware becomes agnostic and it doesn't matter, this is how they make the money today. That as they move towards services, does that mean that we will see the demise of those bigger companies? All the things we've ever talked about have been an issue for them.
But we would lose a lot by doing that. If we just make the hardware commoditized and interchangeable, and then have the same problem at the data layer or the application or the delivery problem, if they become closed, then we haven't really moved very far.
No, but I'd argue today, kind of the hardware is kind of
Almost there.
Is commoditized to some extent. It's the tools that are the variation today. How quickly can I get in and out and engineer a project? And that becomes more of a focus.
And then to add to Steve, beside the data side that you were saying, Steve, I'd also argue that there's the command and control side. Again, I go up, do the application, do all the analytics, do exactly what I think we all know we can do. But then obviously you got to do something with the data and the analytics. And the last thing I want to have to do is go send a truck out unless I really have to. If I can do it via remotely and online, hey, more power to it. So that controller, again, is part of that enablement, but it's got to be that type of controller and you've got to have the open communications, the open protocol, all the open stuff for that to pay off, to be able to do something command and control.
And Roger, there will still be differences in the hardware. There's going to be a 32-point controller. There might be quality differences. Each one, maybe the Chinese stuff. There will still be differentiators. It's not just going to be communist one controller fits all. But it will be interesting to see if it's on the hardware. I think most controllers, VAB especially, it's a fairly dumb device that even though, if on one side you have a pure commodity of everything's the same, on the other side you have 50 different ones that don't always play nice, maybe getting closer to the other side would push forward interoperability.
You're breaking up quite a bit.
You're breaking up really bad, yeah.
But so I think what we're saying, or maybe I put it as a question, is what we're saying there's really, we need this to be an open industry, going back to not using the word open on its own. The whole stack needs to be open. Is that a good way of thinking about it?
We will eventually get there.
Yeah, and maybe think about it in terms of who benefits from that, and then the opposite, who loses from that, right? And companies who've enjoyed profits and revenues from being proprietary, and their value was in creating these proprietary solutions and systems, are likely to be the ones that would lose in an open world. And the benefactors, to me, is this creates like I said in the Q&A, a bigger pie for everybody. It lowers the overall cost for deployment, which broadens the market, further and further out into more and more kind of secondary applications or adjacent applications. And the value really gets pushed into the intellectual side of things and not on, who has inventory available or other kind of secondary factors. I think it will drive innovation much, much faster in an open world and open environment than a proprietary.
If you look at the PC industry and also phones, it has provided a mechanism for people to create very specific and relatively small and sometimes niche products or solutions that they can scale, right?
Yep.
So right now, one of the problems is you have to build a whole stack, and you have to build, in the mentality of proprietary is you kind of have to build a lot of stuff to deliver things. Having an open sort of philosophy of the industry allows you to just focus on what you're good at and allow other people to do the same.
I think a closer example, perhaps, Santo, is the lighting industry. Whoever thought you'd see what's happened to Philips and GE and the major players there in a really short space of time. Once LED lighting come in, there was suddenly 2,000 Chinese lighting manufacturers. They had to go away and rediscover themselves and were actually sold off, and Philips wouldn't even say it's a lighting company. So that's a nearer comparison.
Here's a comment from Bob Rayner that he put to all panelists. Bob, hope you don't mind. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Open protocols and open control platforms will allow us to have more universal tools and service more systems. This also allows us to have a universal way to track security risk, to your point, Jim.
That's music to your ears, Steve. And Jim. Okay, Alper, I've got about a minute or so left. Do you want to wrap this up, Mr. Open? Or Mr. Open Alper, I guess. I can't just say open, can I?
Open Alper.
OA.
So I'm thinking the future is bright for open, especially on the RISC-V developments. We will see CPUs and microcontrollers and micro PCs processors as open without any loyalty fees. That will enable us to feel safer for commercial companies raising the prices up. And I think that is right in that realm. And on the software side, we are seeing more and more standardization that will get us to a true open system in the future.
All right. That is wonderful. So thank you, everybody. Thanks, Trevor, for chiming in, and others for their questions and comments. YouTube will be up in the morning, and we will be back next week for Monday Live. So with that, bye-bye, everybody.
See y'all later.
Cheers.
Bye now.
Bye.